Hey, what up? It's your boy. You know, Japan is a country that is not exactly the most fond of the English language. I mean, it's very classic examples of people going to Japan, seeing a really funny, like, English sign that is clearly been passed through Google Translate, taking a picture of it, posting on the internet, and laughing about it collectively. I've done that many times. That stuff gets never old. But Japan seems to be, I guess, aware of the fact that the country or the people in the country are not exactly the strongest with the English language. And so a study was done, and the results are not shocking, but also quite shocking at the same time. But before we begin, let me ask a quick question to the weebs in the audience today. Have you ever wanted to experience a cute anime-made waifu living in your home and taking care of you in a fun, interactive, and potentially exciting way? Then look no further than today's sponsor, Secret of Sophia Light. Brought to you guys by DL Site, holding the largest selection of Japanese doujin contents with over 10,000 products translated to English, with everything from manga, games, anime, ASMR works, visual novels, and yes, even an adult section for all genders. And with each item being published directly by the artist, buying stuff on DL Site also directly supports hardworking creators in Japan. And yes, in case you are wondering, there is in fact an R18 version of this game. But don't tell your parents I said that. The Safe for Work version is more like a demo to give you a taste of what's to come, but if you want to unlock the full benefits of Sophia to see what she can really do for you, I would recommend getting the R18 version. Either way, if you want to check out Secret of Sophia Light for free, no credit card necessary, then hop on over to DL Site and download it today by clicking the link down in the description below. And thank you for today's sponsor. Now, let's move on to the show. So we got this article here from Sora News that says over half of Japanese students in nationwide test score 0% in English-speaking section. 0% out of all the fucking students in Japan that did an English test. Half of them, like however many hundreds and thousands of children that are, half cannot speak a single word of English. So let's check this out. In April, Japan's Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Science and Technology conducted its National Academic Ability and Education Condition Survey, a test to measure the abilities of 6th year elementary school students and 3rd year middle school students, equivalent to the 9th grade in the US school system. So for those of you living in Australia, that would be year 6 and year 9. Though the tests are conducted every year, this was the first time since 2019 that middle school students were tested on their English abilities, and the results weren't pretty. The English test was divided into 4 skill sets: listening, reading, writing, and speaking. Students fared the best in listening, with an average score of 58.9% for that category. That might not sound like much, but when you consider that the middle school students' average score on the math section of the test, which was written in Japanese, of course, was just 51.4%, 58.9% for English, listening looks pretty good. And I think the reason for that may be just because a lot of younger kids today that have so much more, I guess, close ties with instant education or instant entertainment through the internet and smartphones and stuff like that are probably, for one, just being more open to English things on the internet. You know, say like maybe some of them are big, you know, metal, rock, rap fans, or, you know, they might watch movies, or they might just come in contact with more English loan words that are thrown around, not just on the internet, but in everyday life. So I think the listening side of things definitely makes the most sense. And I think the same thing can be said for people who are doing Japanese, right? Like if you consume enough, say like anime, Japanese music, Japanese shows, Japanese radio, whatever it might be, your listening is naturally going to improve a lot faster than every other, I guess, skill set. Unfortunately though, it was downhill from there. For English listening, the average score was 51.7%, and for English writing, 24.1%, which is big yikes. That's a big yikes, dog. Then way down at the bottom of the 4 English language skills came speaking, for which the average score was just 12.4%, which again makes a lot of sense. I think the same thing can be said with any kind of new language. The speaking side of things definitely takes a lots of practice for one, but lots of confidence to be able to master. And obviously, you know, writing is by far the most difficult with any language, especially with Japanese for English speakers, because you just have to learn a whole new subset of alphabet or characters. But I guess English writing or whatever, you know, Japanese kids, although they might not be able to speak English all that well, they can read the alphabet. I mean, it's a hell of a lot easier than the shit that we have to deal with in Japan in terms of characters that needed to be remembered. Even more startling, and this is a bold point, 63.1% of the test takers got a 0 for the English-speaking section, failing to satisfactorily answer any of the 5 questions it contained. And again, it's all about practice. It's all about putting yourself out there to actually use the language. And this is not just with English. This is with any language that you're learning. If you want to improve on it, then the easiest thing to do is to just say, look, I don't care if I embarrass myself for not sounding perfect, because the other person who is talking to me is fully aware that I am not perfect. But all that's important is just getting into the habit of using the language, getting into the habit of testing out the language. And hopefully, if you're talking to a nice enough person, they will correct you and they might answer back with something that you can then use to improve upon your speaking. So clearly, all these 6th graders and 9th graders are not talking in English whatsoever, which again is understandable for a country like Japan. You know, all those kids, families are probably speaking Japanese at home, siblings, friends are all speaking Japanese at home, teachers are all speaking Japanese at school. What 6th or 12th grader is, or 6th or 9th grader, excuse me, is going to be casually conversing in English with their fellow peers? Probably not a lot of people, unless you're going to say an international school, or your parents happen to be friends with a foreigner who shows up to your home every week to practice English with. The format of the questions in the speaking section was complicated, and it was probably difficult for the students, said a spokesperson from the ministry regarding the results. I mean, look, even if that might be the case, this spokesperson is huffing copium, okay? Because it's so important for Japanese kids, especially to get well versed into English and be able to use English in everyday life, because that is going to be one huge aspect that is going to make foreigners who come to Japan feel so much more comfortable with assimilating to the Japanese culture. Because again, that wall of entry of different language barriers is a big hurdle for a lot of people that they might not overcome no matter how many years they live in Japan, right? So just being able to live in a country where there is a more common language that every person who comes to Japan can or may be able to speak, that's a huge step in progress for Japan to be able to, for one, be more comfortable with foreigners, but two, foreigners to come to Japan and be more comfortable. Numerically, the speaking scores seem dismal, but there might be very well some truth to the idea that the format didn't do the kids any favors. One of the speaking section questions involved having students listen to a native English speaker talk about differences in disposable plastic bag usage between shoppers in New Zealand and Japan, after which they were given 60 seconds to organize their thoughts on the topic before having 30 seconds to express them in English. Okay, you know what? In this case, I still stand by what I said earlier, but in this test's case, yeah, that question is kind of fucking ridiculous. If you were asked this question in school, in your own mother tongue, would you be able to answer this correctly, or would you be able to answer this satisfactorily? I sure as hell wouldn't. No 6th or 9th grader is thinking about, the differences in disposable plastic bag usage between shoppers in New Zealand and shoppers in my country. No kid is thinking about those topics, right? These are the kind of topics that teachers teach kids in their own tongue at this age, let alone a different language, right? So, okay, in this test case, yeah, that is pretty ridiculous. They should have maybe, toned it down a little bit on the difficulty, or at least given them more time to think, because I think this would be even difficult for some people in their own tongue to be able to answer satisfactorily. As any parent who's asked their teenager how was school today and have been met with a minute of stony silence before an eventual, fine, I guess, 14, 15-year-olds aren't known for being particularly eloquent or loquacious when talking to someone outside their peer group, and that is a fact. That is a undeniable fact. I was exactly like that when I was 14 and 15. I probably didn't even know what the word eloquent or loquacious even meant back there, because I certainly wasn't either of those things, and most 14 to 15-year-old kids are not like that. So yeah, okay, that totally makes a lot of sense. By comparison, at least one of the English-speaking questions in 2019 had a much similar setup. The students were asked to imagine that they were being interviewed by a foreign news crew and to describe a dream or goal they have for their future and what they need to do to accomplish it. Sure, it's a bigger topic than plastic bag usage, but it's also something students are more likely to already have a personal answer for, and removing the necessity to come up with the answer itself on the spot arguably makes it a more accurate measure of the student's English-speaking abilities than combining that with a trial of their aptitude and quickly forming an opinion. That's also fact. Soren, you spitting facts. They don't miss. I mean, that I completely agree with that statement. You know, if you're going to want to test a person's knowledge in a language, make it about a topic that they're well adversed in, or at least make it a topic that is more natural to them, something that they would be happy to share with you in their own tongue. Fucking what you think about plastic bag usage in New Zealand versus Japan, that is certainly not a topic that a 15-year-old is like, oh, I'm glad you asked. This year's test was also the first time that the English-speaking section of the test was conducted online as opposed to face-to-face with testing staff. While humanity as a whole has gotten more accustomed to voice video chat than ever during the pandemic, for many people, there's still an added layer of awkwardness and stress compared to a face-to-face conversation, which likely had a negative impact on test takers' scores. And yes, I do agree with that sentiment as well, but also there was a study done in Japan that during the COVID pandemic here, because of how many people were, one, not seeing other people, not interacting with other people in a country that is already one of the loneliest countries in the world, and two, everyone's still to this day wearing masks outside. A lot of people are still wearing masks, even though it is completely an option now. People are just more comfortable with not seeing another person's face, or maybe they're just not used to it. Maybe they get overwhelmed with seeing another person's face. And I feel the COVID pandemic did a lot of damage to a lot of people's psyches while it was happening, because that was a long time to be secluded from another person, let alone a group of people, let alone in another language. The combination of a less complicated question format and face-to-face speaking the last time the test was conducted might explain why the average score for the English-speaking section was 30.8% in 2019, still low, but more than double the 12.4% for 2023. That said, scores dropped for all 4 skills in the English section of the test compared to 2019, especially when students had to express themselves. The average listening and reading scores fell by 9.4% and 4.5%, while writing and speaking plummeted from 22.3% to 18.4%. It's possible that the decreases can be partly attributed to the effects of the pandemic. Isolation at home and remote learning are generally not the most conducive conditions for language acquisition, particularly self-expression. Motivation also likely sagged for many students, since it's hard to get excited about learning a foreign language when international travel is shut down. Still, it looks like educators and policymakers are going to have a lot of work to do, bringing those scores up by the next time students' English abilities get tested. And I think a lot of very nuanced points were made, especially in that last paragraph there. But I also don't think that is the full picture either. Yes, that is definitely a big factor as to why these points might have dropped. But I think it's also because it's still very new. The Japanese government has actually made English learning compulsory for middle school and high school, but also elementary school as well. I believe it was like within the last decade that they were like, yep, okay, kids should start learning English at a young age, because I think it's only now that the Japanese government is like, oh, okay, maybe knowing English is not only good for the kids, but also good for the economy as well, because those kids who will learn English at school will grow up to be adults who can use English, which will give them more job opportunities, which will eventually help the economy recover. That's probably the thought process that they finally caught onto. So, they made this compulsory rule to learn English in schools in Japan. But I do also think that it is also a lack of interest in learning English for a lot of people. I think a lot of Japanese people are probably thinking to themselves, well, why do I have to learn English when I'm probably going to be in Japan for my entire life? And if no one around me is required to speak English, no one around me is even speaking English in the work environment, in life environment, family environment, then why would I be bothered to learn English? This just seems like a waste of time. They are definitely taking steps to improve upon that, but also it is, at the end of the day, up to the kids as to whether they're actually even interested in learning the language at all, or whether they want to keep the language. Because with languages, if you don't keep that shit, then that shit disappears very, very quickly. And I know several people in my own personal life that have gone through exactly that same situation and regretted it later down the road. So I think it's really important for teachers and parents and stuff like that to really encourage kids to learn English, but also retain their English for when they get older, because every Japanese person, adult, that I know today that can speak English adequately to almost fluently are definitely more well off, and definitely just well off, you know, psychologically, but also just like in a worldly view. They're definitely more aware of the world and taking advantage of that, and, you know, giving themselves the best life. So it does lead on to real life skills that can be used to better your life down the road. So I think that's all these kids need to be learnt about. But you know what? We can't make every kid a success story, anything like that. If kids don't want to learn English whatsoever, then I think that's completely fine. I think one thing that is also very important right now is not only, you know, I guess teaching these kinds of skills to the next generation that is going to be the building blocks of society, but also to the current generation as well. Maybe not get them to like learn English necessarily, but just get them to be aware of English and the importance of English for not only their lives, but also for the entire country and the economy that they're living in. But yeah, that was a really interesting article. If you want to read the full article, I've left it down in the description. Obviously, I didn't get to read all of it, but really interesting think piece. Let me know your thoughts and opinions about it down in the comments below. I'm really curious. Also, like, if you're living in a country that, say for example, English isn't the first language or the only main language, and you are being taught English in schools, or maybe you learn English as a second language, how much did English help you? I mean, it probably helped you enough to watch and understand this video and answer this question, so I guess that's a good thing already. But I'm really curious to see the different perspectives of that everyone has after acquiring a second or even third or fourth language. Let me know down in the comments. But either ways, guys, thanks for watching. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to smack my face right here, subscribe to the channel. Let's keep making big channel number go bigger. Over here next to my head, a couple more videos you can check out if you enjoyed this one, and the links to my social media, as well as my Patreon to support me directly, and my clothing line, nonsense.jp. Rip this shit. It looks clean as fuck. I know, you can get it too. It's down in the description below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.